Hi there, it's wonderful to be with you at the Excelsus Lentekonferensie, and I really want to thank Andre and his team for inviting me to be part of the program this year. I also want to thank Andre especially for allowing me to speak in English. When I speak at churches, especially gemeente, I tell people regularly that I learned my Afrikaans in the Weermag and from Casper de Vries. So it is not safe for churches. And so I thank you for the opportunity to speak in English. We are going to have an opportunity to interact later in the week. And if you are more comfortable asking your questions in Afrikaans, as long as it's not too technical in the language that you use, please feel free to ask your questions in Afrikaans. But as I say, thank you for the opportunity to speak here in English. We're going to do 3 sessions together this week. The first one, as you can see, is entitled AC/DC. Now, maybe I'm showing my age a little bit in my musical style. It's a little bit of a corny title, but it's after COVID and during COVID. And it is really about what we expect over the next few months, and then what the world will look like after COVID, once COVID is history. On Wednesday, we're going to look at some of the implications for the church. Now, I'm a futurist. That's what it says on my business card. And most of my life these days, I spend working with large corporate companies all around the world. Last year, I was in 24 different countries. Not so much this year, of course, traveling face to face, but I'm still working with most of my clients who are spread all around the world. And I help them to anticipate the future. I'm a futurist, yes. That doesn't mean, though, that I can predict the future, unfortunately. Although, having said that, our team at my company, Tomorrow Today Global, we have written over the years, we've written a number of scenarios to help our clients to anticipate deep disruptive changes. One of those scenarios that we wrote more than a decade ago is about a global pandemic that shuts down the whole world and quarantines everybody. It was part of a series in which we were looking at some of the biggest disruptors that we could think of. And we thought of an asteroid hitting the Earth. We thought of the discovery of alien life. We thought of nuclear Third World War. We thought of a massive solar flare that caused an electromagnetic pulse on Earth, wiped clean all the world's computers, and then a global pandemic. So I'm not saying I predicted a global pandemic, but in fact, those people whose job it is to look at the future, to think about what are some of the worst case scenarios. Remember Clem Sunter back in the day used to talk about his high road and low road. You know, what are the worst case scenarios that could happen? Almost all of those people have been thinking about global pandemics for a while. In fact, President Obama, whenever he was asked, "What are you most scared of, Mr. President? What keeps you up at night?" He would always answer, a global pandemic that quarantined the whole world. And when he handed over, and his team handed over to President Trump, by American law, they are required to give a briefing of the most important issue, the biggest thing they're worried about. And they talked about a global pandemic. So it's not as if nobody saw this coming, right? It's not as if this has just hit us out of the blue. And that's why there have been people in the system that we could listen to. Professor Karim is one of them. Well, we can look at their research and we can ask, what's next, right? How do we respond? And so that's, for the last 6 months at least, what I've been doing. So I've shifted from talking about all the other disruptors that are coming our way to talking about what the impact of COVID is going to be on our world over the next few months and years. My other bit of background is that I was an ordained pastor in the Baptist Union. That's what I studied after I had done some work for KPMG. My first degree was a Bachelor of Commerce, and then I went and did chartered accountancy articles. But I was never keen on becoming an accountant or an auditor. I was always focused on ministry. But I wanted to get real world experience. My father had been a pastor, and I didn't want to go straight out of a manse, pastor's house, into my own house. I wanted real world experience, and that's why I went to KPMG. Some of you might be thinking there's an easier way to get real world experience than become a CA, but anyway. And then I went and studied at the Baptist Theological College and went all the way up to a master's level in theology, and that's where my connection comes to the NG Church, because I did my master's through the Huguenot College via UNISA, where I looked at multi-generational ministries in different churches. I've since added a doctorate in business administration to go full circle, because I really did feel that my contribution in the world, maybe even I can be bold enough to call it my calling, is this task of being a futurist. And that wasn't something that a church could pay me to do. It's not something that you need on staff at a local congregation. And I now basically get the business world to pay for my research, to pay for the work that I do every day. And then I can use those insights, research into how the world is changing. I can use that for the benefit of the church. And a particular passion of mine is in youth ministries, in helping youth ministries to understand this. So, with all of that said, in this session we're going to have a look at scenarios for the next few months and years, and then on Wednesday we're going to have a look at the future of the church and how the COVID crisis might impact where church ministry goes in the next few years. I'm not going to be talking about how to go back to church after lockdown. That's not my focus. I want to go a little bit further into the future. When COVID is history, when we're finished with COVID, is there going to be a lasting legacy for the church? I think there will be. In fact, I think there will be a lot of lasting legacies. I think the church is going to shift and change dramatically because of this period that we're in now. We'll talk about that on Wednesday. And then on Friday morning, we'll have a live Q&A. Again, I want to thank Andre and his team for allowing me to pre-record these two keynote sessions. It is going to be interactive as well. You'll see how in a little while. But we're going to have a live interactive session on Friday. And I'm going to be able to answer your questions and chat with you and engage with you on Friday. So that's my contribution during the Lentekonferensie this week. Right, let's get into our content then, because what is going to happen over the next few months and years? Well, firstly, we are at the moment waiting for one of two things to happen. We're either going to get a vaccine or we're going to get herd immunity. And I say that we are waiting for that because COVID is now in the system. We know that COVID, luckily for us, our medical professionals are learning more about COVID, and we know that we are reducing the fatality rate, which is fantastic news. My sister got COVID just 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and it was a fairly bad case. I mean, she was in hospital, bedridden. She said it's one of the worst things she's ever experienced. Luckily, though, she got better, and she's actually now back at work. And our medical professionals have learnt a lot in the last 4 or 5 months, so that not that many people are dying of COVID, but if less than 1% of people die from COVID, about 20% of people are getting a very bad version of it. And quite a lot of those people, almost all of the people who get a bad version of COVID, like my sister, who had to go to hospital because they were concerned about her oxygen levels in her blood, and she was really, really feeling in pain. Sadly, for my sister and for others like her, there's a huge possibility that they will have had lasting damage to their system. COVID, as we know, is not just a lung disease. It's a full body disease that impacts every part of your body, from your brain to your heart, to your kidneys and your liver, and even some people are thinking your bones. It's crazy. And it might be as many as 20% of people will have lifelong, significant issues with their health. We just don't know that yet. So very few governments in the world are just stepping back and saying, right, not too many people are dying, we'll just get rid of lockdown now. In fact, as we record this now, in the middle of September, you've got a whole lot of countries going back into lockdown. The UK has just announced now that they are limiting travel again, that people are only allowed to meet in groups of 6. New Zealand, especially the North Island, Auckland, is locked down again. In Melbourne, Australia, they've gone back to full curfew, our version of basically lockdown level 5, or probably level 4, more likely. South Korea and Beijing closed all of their schools 2 weeks ago. And Spain, Italy, France, Germany have all indicated that they are beginning to see a rise in cases again. And if that continues in the next week or two, they will be locking down again. So we're not finished this, right? And I think it's going to be 2 years before we are completely finished. It certainly is going to be the rest of 2020, most of 2021. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be in lockdown all of that time in South Africa. That's not what I'm predicting. But I am predicting that for the next 18 months or so, until at least into 2022, we are going to be dealing with a balance here. We're not going to have a vaccine quickly. I don't know about you, I'm not prepared to try Vladimir Putin's vaccine. You need a lot of testing to get a vaccine right, and you might have seen that Oxford test, which was the most promising, has been shut down now because something went wrong with the medication in a few people. So vaccines take a long time, and it'll be at least all of next year to get a vaccine, or this herd immunity where everybody's got it. And hopefully got it in a way where we remember that phrase, flatten the curve. And we haven't overwhelmed our hospitals, we haven't overwhelmed the medical system. The balance here is not the balance between lives and livelihood. It's not the balance between health and the economy. That was always a false debate. Everybody believed that you had to do both. You had to protect health and protect the economy. And the trick was where that balance is. And actually, to be honest, on the whole, I think the South African government got it right. Got that balance right, at least. I think they went totally over the top with some of their regulations. And I think they lost it a little bit with some of the draconian regulations they put in place. I think they've also failed to support businesses and society as much as they should have. But I'm actually fairly convinced they got the balance right. We couldn't just leave our economy open. Have you seen what's going on in India? Have you seen what's going on in Brazil? Those are the countries that we would need to compare ourselves to. And they've got hundreds of thousands of cases with an overwhelmed medical system. That would have been a disaster for us in South Africa. And there was talk early on in March and April. I know people who are in the private healthcare system. They were nervous that the government would even have to nationalize the private hospitals to survive a spike. We've done very well here in South Africa. In fact, the whole of Africa has done remarkably well. And we're still not sure why, actually. There are a whole lot of people who are giving reasons now. I'm not sure any of them are the answer. We'll find this in time. But it's everything from the fact that we have TB and AIDS in the system, that we've actually got strong immune systems. It could be the heat that, we don't really get very cold winters. We think they're cold. The guys in Durban, when it gets below 20, they put on a ski jacket. So it feels cold to us, but from a virus perspective, we don't get snow and cold and that through most of the southern hemisphere, actually. And so maybe we've dodged a bullet for a number of reasons. It might even be the vaccinations we get as kids that have given us an immunity. Well, we don't know, we'll discover in time, but for now we're remarkably blessed to have dodged a real bullet. But this balance now is the balance between our confidence to go out into public spaces and our nervousness, and I'm not talking about fear or irrational nervousness. We're right to be nervous of COVID. It is a vicious disease that, yes, we've reduced the fatality rate, but you don't want to get COVID because you just don't know whether you're going to get the bad version or not. We don't know yet. And it's mutating as well, and younger people are getting it. We don't want to get COVID. So we want to have the confidence to go back into society, to go back to our restaurants, to go back to shops, to go back to school, to travel again, to, of course, come back to church. We want to have that confidence. But we can only do those things if we can protect ourselves. And we know what the protections are. It's physical distancing. It is wearing masks. It is sanitizing all the time. It is checking temperatures on entrance. And it is making sure that if somebody does get COVID and you've got a little COVID hotspot emerging, that you, what they call track and trace, that you make sure you are able to let everybody else know if you've come into contact with COVID, and then everybody goes and gets tests, and we try and control it that way. I don't know about you, but I've had one of those scares in the last few weeks. My youngest daughter needs an au pair. She has autism and needs to do one-on-one tutoring and counseling. She doesn't go to school at age 15. And one of the people who cares for her and is her tutor came down with a very, very bad headache and cough and a blocked nose and was really feeling awful just a few hours after spending time with Rebecca. And so we had to go in and think, well, if she's taken 5 or 6 or 7 days to incubate and she's got COVID, then she might have given COVID to Rebecca anytime over the last 5 days. Rebecca might have given it to us. Who might we have given it to? We had connected and contact with a few people, so we had to phone them, let them know. We all went for COVID tests, and we discovered, luckily in our case, there was no COVID. But this is now the reality of our world. This is the balance. As we try and get back to normal as much and as fast as possible, we need to continually be backing off again if COVID comes into the system. And that, I think, is going to be the reality for the next 2 years. Well, at least until the end of 2021. This is going to affect schools and restaurants and hotels and shops, and of course, churches. And that's going to be the price we pay for getting back to normal. I'll talk about back to normal in a little while, because I don't think we're ever going back to normal, but let's just use that label for now. That's the price we pay for being able to meet other people and get back into public again. being vigilant. Some people are suggesting that that might last forever. I don't think so. But when I say some people, I'm talking about Professor Karim, South Africa's leading epidemiologist. I'm talking about Anthony Fauci, America's leading epidemiologist. So I'm talking about people who know what they're talking about. And they're saying we might have moved into a new era, an era where pandemics are part of the human experience, and we have to change the way we interact. I think that's a little bit premature, but certainly for the next 12 to 18 months, that's going to be our reality. And in that environment, there isn't really a right or wrong here. I'm not making right or wrong judgments about what is being done. We desperately want to open up our public spaces again. In the church environment, you desperately want to get back to church, right? But we have to understand the reality of you can't go back to church and create super spreader environments. You can't go back to the office if people in the office have COVID. You can't go to school if people at school have COVID. We have to constantly be easing in, and then if we find a COVID outbreak, we ease out again. And this is going to cause deep disruption in society for at least all of next year. So that's all I'm really going to say at this stage. I'm not a medical expert, although I've obviously consulted with many medical experts to come to an opinion. But this is the reality of the world, I believe, that we need to at least prepare for. If somehow we get a miracle vaccine in the next few months, that will be wonderful. And I'd be very happy to say, brilliant, we've now got the vaccine, COVID's out the system, we can sort ourselves out. But you can't rely on that, and you can't plan for that. That will be a beautiful miracle, but we can pray for it, but we can't plan for it. So how should we respond? What should our plans be, and what should we do? I want to suggest 5 things to you. And I'm kind of going to give you exactly what I give my normal corporate clients. So I'm not going to turn this specifically for the church. On Wednesday, we're going to have a look at what I think the church should be doing and responding. But for now, let me just give you what I give to my corporate clients, and you'll see. I think it will connect, and we'll come back to it on Wednesday and apply it into a ministry environment then. So there are 5 things to do in order to respond to COVID. The first is we need to recognize that we were already being disrupted. COVID is not the first disruptor to come our way in our lifetimes. And it certainly is not going to be the last. We always expected the 2020s to be one of the most disrupted decades of all time. Have a look at this newspaper headline, right? Okay, 140,000 jobs have been lost. Now, when they say the high street, that means the retail sector, shopping malls and things. That's the language they use in England to talk about shopping centres and shopping malls. Call it the high street. 140,000 jobs, except, look at the date. That's last year. That's 2019, before COVID even arrived. The retail sector has been turned on its head in the last 3 or 4 years because of e-commerce and online and changes to the way that people shop. Now, I'll give you another example, a South African example now. Banks again. This is not 2020. This was happening in 2018. And then implemented in 2019. And I'm just using the one that was in the news the most. Most of the other banks have got rid of people in the last 18 months. Let me give you another example, right? Just 3 weeks ago, Paris elected their mayor, and they re-elected the previous mayor, and her campaign promise was around sustainability and green issues. And she has committed that the Paris Olympics, which hopefully will happen in 2024 in Paris, that the Paris Olympics will be plastic free. Now, think about that. That is insane. I have a lot of clients who are in environments where they package pretty much everything in plastic. I mean, think about Coca-Cola, think about Nestle, think about Kraft Heinz, think about Unilever. Those are all clients that I work with. All of them are freaking out because they're thinking, how is it even possible that in the next 4 years we can change all of our packaging to not be plastic? We can change the way we package things for transportation, no plastic involved. And the mayor of Paris has basically said, hey guys, we were able to respond, boom, boom, to COVID, right? We saw a global crisis and we responded. Why can't we respond to the global crisis of climate change in the same way with the same force? I think this is going to happen, right? And it's one of the disruptors that has been in the system for a while already, and we know is going to disrupt us further over the next decade or two. The label that we use, and I mean, even our president used this label in his State of the Union earlier this year, is the fourth industrial revolution. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's a good label that helps us recognize that we are in a new era of history where new technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud mobility, technologies that move us into a space of global connection, then climate change and sustainability, then geopolitical shifts. I mean, think Brexit is still going to happen, and that looks like an even bigger mess than we could have imagined. There's still the America-China trade war. There's still the argument between America and Mexico. There's still tensions between India and China. Now there's tensions between China and Australia. The list just goes on of deeply disruptive forces that are coming our way. And I actually think that COVID has accelerated some of those forces. You know, things like robotics and artificial intelligence are not looking at us and saying, oh, I see you dealing with COVID. I'll come back later. Deal with COVID. I'll wait until you're finished. No. All of these other disruptors are waiting in the wings. They are there and they are going to change the world as we know it. And the first response that we need to have to COVID is to realize that COVID might actually be the least of our concerns for the rest of the 2020s. All of these other things are coming our way. Now, to just put this into your head from a church and ministry perspective so that you understand why we're talking about this. We'll see on Wednesday that the shift towards a digital presence for churches, the shift to putting your resources and ministries online is, of course, something that a lot of churches had to rush to in order to respond to lockdown and COVID. So streaming your services, uploading digital resources and so on. But the point is that those trends have been in place for a long time already. Churches should have had apps already. Churches should have been streaming their services already. Churches should have ways to digitally connect. It's the 2020s already. It's no excuse to say, well, we're a church. We don't need to keep up with technology. That's ridiculous, right? We as the church need to be using whatever tools we've got available to us to do the work that we're supposed to be doing, the work of ministry, the work of evangelism, the work of connection, the work of community. And if technology can help us to do that, then we need to embrace those technologies. And so we've been forced to do that by COVID, but I think that that's merely accelerating something that we should have already been doing anyway. Right, more of that on Wednesday. Let me suggest to you that we need to do an analysis of which of the trends, which of the forces that are in play at the moment are merely short-term. They're adjustments for COVID. And as soon as COVID is over, boom, like an elastic band. You know, if you pull an elastic band and let it go, it'll snap back and go back to place immediately. Which things have changed in the world that will snap back as soon as possible? I mean, a good example here, right, is weddings. So this past weekend, for some reason, I know of 4 people in my friendship circle who, you know, just second weekend of September into springtime, they had planned to get married this past weekend. And all 4 of them cancelled their weddings. They didn't want to go ahead with them when they couldn't get their family and their friends to join them in the celebration. That's going to snap back. As soon as we're allowed to, people are going to be rescheduling their weddings. You're going to be very busy on your weekends over as soon as we get to lockdown level 1 or level 0. But again, we're going to have to, in the next few months, deal with how to do that during COVID. But I'm talking about after COVID. So you can deal with that issue yourself. I'm thinking about 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We're not going to say people decided that they weren't going to get married anymore. I mean, that's obviously not going to happen. So some things will snap back, but some things, and this is what I'm more concerned about, sometimes when you stretch an elastic band and you hold it stretched for too long, it stays stretched. And those are the things I want us to think about, the lasting legacies of COVID. And I'd like to suggest that there are 3 different areas that we should be looking at when we think about the lasting impact of COVID. And there's a 4th one, and that's the church. And we'll look at that on Wednesday. But for now, I want to have a look at the world, at the workplace, and at community, or if we use the W's, the we. If I'm using W's, then the 4th one is worship. Quite clever, eh? These 4 W's. Right, let's just give you a few examples, because what I'm really suggesting is that this is work that you and your leadership can do together. I think these are good conversations for you and your teams to have. Your full-time staff as well as your church leadership teams. I think you should have these conversations together so that you can look in your community, in your gemeente, and you can work out what the impact will be for you. So if we look at the world, this is the big picture, right? Geopolitics. A number of things are going to change and remain changed. One of the best examples here is global supply chains. Remember back in early March, right? There was a massive rush on toilet paper. Remember that? The hoarding of toilet paper? Maybe some of you hoarded toilet paper back then. It all started in Australia, if I remember correctly. And my understanding is that Australia import all of their toilet paper from China. So it wasn't unreasonable, it wasn't irrational for Australians to actually go out and hoard toilet paper. because if global supply chains were shut down, Australia might have run out of toilet paper. And well, we all know what Australians are full of, right? So they need as much toilet paper as they can get. But all of us who've got friends and family in Australia and we're still living here in South Africa, we just heard from them, get toilet paper, and we rushed out and we did it. We didn't need to, because I think, as far as I know, we got 5 or 6 toilet paper manufacturers locally. We were never going to run out. Some of you are never going to run out of toilet paper now because you've got a garage full of the stuff. Yeah, other things. We've realized that we can't get them now at the moment because of lockdown. And we might not have realized which things were imported and which weren't. Maybe a more serious example is Eskom, right? So wouldn't it have been super clever of Eskom to do all of the maintenance that needed to be done during lockdown when we didn't need a lot of electricity? Apparently they thought about that. They planned to do it, and then they ran out of spare parts. And all of the spare parts they needed in order to do the maintenance had to be imported, and they weren't allowed to import them because of lockdown regulations. I think a lot of industries, a lot of companies are going to be thinking, should we change our supply chains? Should we regionalize, right? So we don't want to outsource, we don't want to buy everything from China or Southeast Asia or import chickens from Brazil. Don't we want everything to be a little bit more local? And I think there is going to be a readjustment of global connections and engagement. And in some industries, this will work in people's favor. In other industries, it will work against them. That other example I gave you of climate change a moment ago, I think that's going to be one of the big winners in this environment, because people are all going to be saying, like the mayor of Paris is saying, that we should be doing something about climate change. And we now know that we can do something. If the whole world comes together and focuses on a crisis, we can make a massive systemic change quickly. So let's do that with climate change. So that may happen as well. Right, I wonder what examples you might have of things that you think are going to change all around the world in terms of the world systems, and will remain changed, will be a lasting legacy of COVID. It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Maybe an easier conversation to have, and maybe a more practical one, is the issue of the workplace and how we work. And that's obviously been one of the biggest things that has changed. People have been working from home. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that working from home is going to last forever, because let's be honest, a lot of people are not enjoying it. But let's also be honest and say you're not really working from home. I've worked from home for 18 years. My company has been going for 18 years and I've never paid a cent in rental. We work from home, we work from coffee shops. We've been a virtual team since day one. But I'm set up for that. I have 18 years of practice. A lot of you were forced to go home. A lot of your people in your congregation are not working from home. They are stuck at home trying to survive a crisis. And of course, in South Africa, many of our homes are not big enough for people to work from home. Most South Africans don't have the luxury of space at home to be able to do all of their work from there. So the work from home, I don't think, is the real revolution. I think the real revolution is work from anywhere. Now, this is going to have a big impact on the church conversation on Wednesday. But think about it just at the moment from a work perspective. Up until February 2020, our default setting was you must come into the office, right? We do things in a physical space in the office, and if for some reason you need to be away from the office, you can be away from the office for a few hours or a day or so, for whatever reason, but the default setting is you come back to the office. All of our meetings happen face to face and in person. That was the default setting. Now we've realized it is possible to do a whole lot of things in a virtual environment that we possibly didn't think we would want to do in a virtual environment. And now, I think in the future, the default setting is going to be you don't have to come into the office. There might be a very good reason to come to the office. And if there is a good reason, well then come to the office. But maybe you can do what you wanted to do at the office at another space. Maybe we're going to see offices, instead of having one big head office that everybody has to drive to every day, companies are going to have smaller satellite locations where smaller groups of people can meet and connect in smaller groups. Do you see where I'm going with the church here and where we're going to go on Wednesday? If churches maybe had a picture in mind that the best form of church was to build the size of your congregation up and then build this big auditorium that people would drive to from far away. And they were used to doing that because that's what they did from Monday to Friday for their offices. If people are no longer used to driving far distances to go to an office, what makes you think that they'll want to come to your big fancy church building? I speak to people about what it's going to feel like to go back to the office. And then I ask people, and if we were live and in person, I'd get us to have a conversation at this point. But I say to people, are you missing the office? Do you want to get back to the office? And a lot of people say, yes, I don't like being at home. You know, I've got my partner, my wife, my husband, I've got my kids at home. It's so distracting. Also have Netflix and the fridge at home. I want to get back to the office, right? And then I say, but what are you really missing at the office? What's the thing that you really want to go back to the office for? And they say, it's the human contact. I just want to connect with other people. And I just want to be able to walk over to somebody's desk, you know, not send them an email or a message, just walk into their office and have a chat with them, and get some information from them without an email. And look, I'm an introvert, right? So I'm somebody who likes my own space and gets drained of energy when I'm with other people. So for every person who's saying, I'm missing the office, I'm missing being able to just go in and speak to people, there's someone like me who's not missing being interrupted. Because that's the other side of it, right? When you walk into somebody else's office, you are interrupting them. Have you thought about that? There are people who are loving not being around you at the office. They are loving not being interrupted. Maybe they're too nice to tell you that, but I'm sure it's the truth. So what I'm saying to people, let me get practical and give you some advice here, is think about what you are really missing by not meeting. And instead of just going back to normal, instead of just going back to the office as it was in January and February, why not make sure you have these conversations with your team, with your colleagues, to make sure we get what we are really missing from the office. So we don't just go back to the default settings. We actually go back to the office and we set up the office to give us what we now know we really want from it. And I'm sure that you can see that we are going to have that conversation about the church. What are we really missing about the church? We'll have this conversation on Wednesday, but just between you and me now, most of you at this conference, you full-time pastors, dominees, predikants, leraars, you be honest with me. You are not missing Sunday church. I mean, you're missing the connection with the congregation, you're missing the vibe of the community of the church, but you're not missing working hard on a Saturday to make sure your sermon is finished, because I assume you are recording your sermon earlier in the week now. You're also not missing getting up early on a Sunday morning. Remember, I am the son of a pastor, and I was an ordained pastor myself. As much as that's what we do, as much as that's our passion and our calling, it is nice to sleep in on a Sunday a little bit, isn't it? It's nice to not have the stress and the pressure of the Sunday. Just between you and me. We don't have to tell everybody else that. But this is the point, right? That things are changing. Now, let me pull together what I was saying a few minutes ago about digital transformation. Because the reason we can work from anywhere is that we now have digital tools that allow us to do that. And McKinsey did a bit of research a month or so ago during lockdown. Here's a summary of their research. I'll zoom in a second. I know there's a lot going on here on this graph. McKinsey asked people, what technologies are you using now during lockdown? New technologies that you're using in new ways to engage with lockdown. And that's the vertical axis over here. The higher up these things are on this axis, the more people are using them during lockdown. Then they asked, are you planning to use those technologies after lockdown? And that's the horizontal axis. The further things go across that way, the more likely people are to use those technologies after lockdown. So just to zoom in here a little bit, these are the categories that they talked about. Things like virtual conferences, online education, distance schooling, restaurant deliveries of food. The big one, by the way, you might have seen on the previous graph, the one that was up towards the top, was telemedicine, right? I mean, think about that. A year ago, your doctor would have said, I can't diagnose you over the phone. I can't diagnose you over a Zoom call. You have to come and see me. And now, because of COVID, your doctor is saying, please don't come and see me, right? Stay away. Let's do even a WhatsApp call. My doctor's got a good WhatsApp group going. And we, as patients, are saying, well, this actually works. Not for everything, not all of the time, but for now at least, it works. And for some things, it definitely does work. And doctors, this is even more important, doctors are saying, it does work. We can actually do telemedicine. So, yeah, maybe there are going to be a whole lot of digital technologies that we've learned to use during lockdown that we will continue to use after lockdown. And of course, you can see that this is going to impact the church. We'll come back to that on Wednesday. Okay, I can get into the stuff, as you can see. There's so much that we could talk about when we talk about how the workplace, the workspace has changed. And I think this is going to be the biggest lasting legacy of COVID, all of these shifts taking place in our workspaces. So the final thing I want to talk about today is communities, societies. Us together as a community. There are going to be things that will change and will be lasting legacies. Some of those are simple things it's not a big point to make, but it'll get you thinking. So, for example, I don't think we'll ever shake hands again. Not with strangers anyway. Just between you and me, shaking hands is a very gross thing to do. I know I've told you already I'm an introvert and I'd prefer to have my own space. But honestly, oh, hello. Okay. And for all of you guys, sorry to be a bit crude about this, but we've been in the gents' toilets. We know how many men come out of the loo without washing those hands properly. At least COVID might leave us the legacy of people washing their hands properly often. But maybe we will move to being a little bit more Asian in how we greet each other. I certainly am never shaking hands again. I promise you that. If you and I ever meet again, please don't even try me out. Well, you can try, and you're going to get an elbow. I love that. This is a time for a change. Okay, silly example. Let me get a little bit more serious. There's going to be a lot of stress in the system. I'll come back and talk about that in a second, but people are working hard. At the beginning of lockdown, I had great plans. I thought, lockdown, wow, okay, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to catch up on my reading list. I know you've got a reading list just like mine. Just piles and piles of books next to your bed on bookcases you've never read. I thought, I'm going to catch up on reading. Some of you maybe thought you catch up on Netflix. I even thought I might learn a new language. I'm desperate to learn Zulu and just never get the time. I know it's an excuse, but I thought maybe I could do this. I don't know about you, but I haven't had that gap. Lockdown has been tough. I've been sleeping badly. I've been working harder than I've worked before. It's difficult to even separate work and leisure. Days roll into nights, weeks roll into weekends, weeks roll into months, months roll on. We're in September already. We're nearly 6 months in lockdown, and we are stressed, and we're going to need some counseling as well. In fact, by the way, I think counseling and trauma counseling and psychiatry and psychology are going to be some of the big, it wouldn't be the right thing to say the big winners from COVID, but they are certainly going to be very, very busy. And that's part, we'll talk about this again on Wednesday, that's going to be part of our contribution from a ministry perspective to provide people with real opportunity for healing and counseling. And we're going to need to do quite a lot of that because people are stressed, right? We're also going to be dealing with significant economic issues for a long period of time. I think the economy will recover, but we were already in a tough place in South Africa, across Africa before COVID, and it's not going to get better quickly. So we're going to be dealing with tough issues. And we're going to have to be kind to each other in society. I truly hope that some of what we've seen during lockdown, of people contributing to friends and family, to community, to feeding schemes, being there for each other. I truly hope that extends well beyond lockdown, that we see the need that other people have. Simple example in South Africa is national health insurance, right? We were having the conversation for the last few years, and there were a lot of people who were saying, why do we need NHI? Why should we put an emphasis on it? Well, I think we know now, right? We know that we have to look after everybody in our country, that the richest person in South Africa is only as protected from a disease, a communicable disease, as the poorest person is. We have to provide healthcare, adequate healthcare systems, adequate health insurance for everybody in the country. I truly hope we come out of COVID and out of lockdown with a different mindset towards connection, community, nation building, and so on. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts, some of my examples. This is not a comprehensive list. We could take a full day and still not finish talking about this. But hopefully you can use these three categories here to have conversations with your team. Don't just dive into talking about the church. And we'll talk about why on Wednesday. I have a huge fear that people are so desperate to get back to normal that they don't see the opportunity to reimagine what needs to happen. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, we will talk about church on Wednesday, but I'm going to start by suggesting that many of our churches were actually already broken and in the process of being deeply disrupted. I know that's not true for all churches, except it depends how you judge it, right? Do we say that a church that's got a big building and hundreds, thousands of people attending every Sunday, is that a healthy church? Are we sure we're using the right measurement? I think a lot of churches are going to discover that COVID was a pruning time, are going to discover that they don't have the maturity of the people in the system. They might have lots of numbers, but they don't have lots of maturity. I think that we will discover that people coming to your church to sit in a big auditorium and enjoy the experience doesn't translate to people contributing to ministry when that experience doesn't exist. And I think that we need to find ways to measure whether our churches are in fact healthy. But that's Wednesday's conversation. What I want to focus on today is the fact that we are in a moment of deep disruption. It has already been with us for 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, that we have been dealing with disruption. But we've been able to hold that disruption at arm's length and pretend it wasn't happening. We can go to our synods, we can go to our meetings, we can have our church services week after week. We can go through the church's cycle of Easter and harvest and Christmas, and we can hold the disruption at bay and pretend that it isn't happening. But now we can't. Now we have a big COVID spotlight shining on us and saying, you are being disrupted. It's not just a change. It's not just a bit of a challenging time we're going through. You are being deeply disrupted. And so the first thing we have to do, I know I said I've got 5 points. I do. Not all of them are the same length as the first one. The first point is we have to recognize that we were already being disrupted, and we have to identify all the disruptions that are coming our way. So that's the first thing you need to do. The second thing that we need to do to respond to the COVID crisis is to discover our COVID pace. What do I mean by that? Well, I was due to run the London Marathon this year. I'm not a very good runner. I only started running a few years ago when I got into my 40s and I realized that my waistline wouldn't look after itself anymore and I needed to get some exercise. I've never been good at exercising or doing sport. So I got into running and I surprised myself. I quickly got to that park run level and got that comfortably, then 10Ks, then even half marathons, and then I thought, let me push myself and see if I can do a marathon. I haven't got to ultra yet, but maybe. And the London Marathon 2020, which runs on the last weekend of April, was due to be my first big international marathon. Got an entry to it, I was very excited. and doing all of my training, and sadly it was cancelled. Hopefully I'll do it sometime in the future. But I spoke to seasoned marathon runners, men and women who had run many, many marathons, and I asked them for advice. What would you tell me as a novice runner? What should I do and not do? If you're a seasoned runner, you probably know what advice they gave me, because every single one of them gave me the same advice. Yep, they all said, Graeme, don't start too quickly. That's the biggest mistake you make. You've trained, you're as fit as you've ever been, you're at the start in Greenwich in London, the gun goes, the music's blaring, there's crowds, the adrenaline's pumping, and you rush out and you think, I feel like $1,000,000. You 5Ks, 10Ks, 15Ks, you're going well. And then marathon runners will tell you this. The marathon only begins at about 35 kilometers. The last few kilometers, you need to conserve your energy. You've got to have energy for the last bit. The first bit, nobody cares how fast you run the first half of a marathon. They only ask you whether you finished. And if you run the first half too quickly, you won't finish. I am very concerned that people in all walks of life are running their COVID race too quickly. If we had told each other back in February what this year would look like, and that we would have to shift online, that we'd all be at home, that we would shut our churches down, that our people wouldn't be going into offices, if we had told ourselves that, we would have said, impossible, can't be done. And yet here we are, and we're doing it. It's not nice, we're not enjoying it, it's tough, but we are doing it. But at what cost? At what price? And I see a lot of my corporate clients speaking to their staff, congratulating their staff, saying, guys, well done on how hard you are working, on how productive you've been. I'm so impressed with you, you're delivering. I cannot believe how good you guys are. The message in that, though, is keep working this hard. I am so concerned that we are going to, in a year or two's time, we're going to see people have survived COVID and are going to get stress-related diseases. And stress-related diseases are heart attacks and cancer and stuff that, well, it's worse than COVID. Wouldn't it be a disaster if you survive COVID and die of something else within the next 2 to 3 years? And I'm not joking about this. I've had people my age, friends, colleagues of mine, who have had heart attacks now in the last few weeks. This is happening. There's a ministry opportunity here, by the way, to have this conversation with your staff, especially with the people who are business owners, to tell them that this year and 2021 are not the year for productivity and efficiency. It's the year for empathy and care. That's a conversation you could and should be having with your people. So find your COVID pace, because this COVID thing is not near done. And we need to make sure we don't just survive 2020, we're going to have to survive 2021 as well. The third thing that you can do to respond to COVID is to build adaptability into your system. What do I mean by this? This is Charles Darwin, by the way. I'm sure you know Charles. And he's most famous, I think, for a saying. I'm sure you can complete the sentence, right? It is survival of the, yeah, you're probably shouting fittest, the survival of the fittest at the screen. That's what you were taught at school. That's what I was taught at school, and it's wrong. You should phone your school up and get a discount, a refund. if you said survival of the fittest, because in actual fact, Charles Darwin said almost exactly the opposite. He said that when the environment changes, when we find ourselves in a time of change, the species that survives, the species that does best, is not the fittest, the cleverest, the strongest, the healthiest, the sexiest, whatever adjective you want to use. It is the organism that is most responsive to change. That's the key. Now, some people might argue that it's helpful to be clever, to be fit, to be sexy, in order to be responsive to change. Fair enough. But the point is, how do we respond to change? How responsive are we when the situation around us changes? By default, most churches are conservative. In that sense, what we mean is that we don't change. Many churches are actively opposed to changes in society and politics. It's kind of the nature of religion and the nature of theology, that we strive to keep things intact. We believe that God never changes, and so we shouldn't either. We'll talk about this again on Wednesday. But what we need to do is we need to become more adaptable, more responsive to changes, not waiting for changes to be forced on us, but becoming more responsive. When our world gets flipped upside down, instead of trying to flip it the right way up again, maybe we need to learn to breathe underwater. I don't know, maybe I'm stretching my picture too far here in terms of an analogy. But what we need to be doing now during COVID is reminding ourselves that we were forced to do things we had never done before. And maybe back in January, we would have said, we can't do that. It's not possible. Now here you are in September, and you are actually doing these things. You are streaming your services live online. You are doing counseling via Zoom. You've changed your church's plans and budgets and whatever. You are more adaptable. The worst thing you can do is to just think, I just need to power through lockdown and come out the other side, and then we go back to the way things were. Why would you want to do that? Yes, some things might go back to the way that they were, but maybe there's stuff we're learning during lockdown that can open up new ministry opportunities in the future. Simple example here, right? So we've got weddings now. Weddings will snap back. People will want their friends and their family to be in the wedding venue with them. But now that churches have got live stream facilities, why wouldn't you live stream every single wedding that you do? And you give it as a service to the people you're marrying, and saying those people who can't join us on the day can still join us live watching your wedding. And of course, you can use that live streamed video as your wedding video. And the church is set up with beautiful angles, beautiful lighting. We've thought this through on your behalf. Our church is a wonderful place to get married because we are using technology. The technology we learned how to use during COVID, we now use all the time, everywhere. It's a simple example, but now stretch that example into things like doing counseling, having home groups, discipleship courses. How will we integrate new technologies? How will we become more adaptable in the future? And then you can go even further and think about how you do your church budgeting and how you manage your facilities and what staff you need on board. And well, now let me move to my fourth point. Because what I really want to suggest to you, and by the way, I think this is my most important point. So I think this is what I've been building up to. So if everything else is just a blur of video and you've been watching and there's too much to think about, let's pause here, because this is what I want you to take away. We need to reimagine, not rebuild, reimagine. We need to take this opportunity to say, what do we want to build back? What are some of the things we've been really missing during lockdown? But then we also need to give ourselves permission to say, if we do have a blank canvas, if we've had a few months, maybe even up to 2 years of complete disruption of our systems, our processes, our natural rhythms, well, how do we reimagine what our church actually looks like? And you know what? You don't have to wait until the end of next year to think about this. Here's a great thought for you, right? As we head into October, we're in the last quarter of the year, and for many churches, the rhythm of the year heads towards Advent and Christmas. This year's Christmas is going to be a Christmas unlike any other. People are not going to be taking the holidays they normally took. People are going to be disappointed that families can't get together. What does your church's calendar look like this December? I think the very worst thing you could do is to simply try and do all the things you would have done during Advent anyway. What you need to be doing is thinking, what opportunities do we have to do things we've never done before, to do things in a way that they've never been done before? What real contribution do our people really need this year? Maybe it's a digital Advent calendar that your church puts together. Who knows? Maybe let me make this point in a different way. Have a look here, right? This is a caterpillar. Let's say we had a workshop and I asked you to improve the caterpillar. This is the workshop. Improve this caterpillar. How would you do that? Well, maybe if you were a caterpillar, you might think, well, I don't want to be eaten by birds. So a better caterpillar is a smaller caterpillar, faster, leaner, meaner, less colors, so that you're not noticeable. Maybe you're a photographer, right? You love taking photos like this. So you say, well, a better caterpillar is a bigger caterpillar with more beautiful colors. There are lots of ways to improve a caterpillar, except some of you are ahead of me, right? Because a better caterpillar is a butterfly. Yeah. Here's what I'm worried about. Too many of you are waiting, desperately hoping for church to go back to normal. You just want your caterpillar back. Maybe you're even convincing yourself you'll do it better when you get back. But it's really everything you've been doing, just slightly better. A better caterpillar. Maybe COVID is an opportunity, maybe even an invitation to find some butterflies. We are not scared of this type of talk as churches because we talk about resurrection all the time. Resurrection only happens, resurrection can only happen if something dies first. The seed planted in the ground, dead, going through winter, and then spring comes. And it blooms again. So the fifth thing you need to do in order to find your butterfly is you need to unlearn. We're very good at learning. This whole conference this week is about learning. But we're not very good at unlearning. Unlearning is about leaving behind the mindsets, the processes and systems, the habits, all of the things that we used to do, and consciously saying those things are not fit for purpose anymore. Now, it's not everything. I'm not saying we must abandon everything. We'll talk on Wednesday and give some ideas, but I'm not saying we abandon everything. But there are some things we should never ever do again. And unlearning says the only way that you can make space for the new is by getting rid of some of the old, clearing it out. To use biblical language, you can't put new wine in old wineskins. And COVID gives us the opportunity to find new wine. Yes, it's a crisis. And your number one task for your church, your leaders, your congregation is to get through the crisis. Absolutely. That's not what I'm talking about. The second task, though, is to find the opportunity. To find the opportunities for new life. The opportunities not just to rebuild, but to reimagine. The opportunities to learn how to become more adaptable, so that when all the other disruptors are going to come your way in the future, you are ready for them. You are not ready for them because you are some kind of unmoving fortress of theological excellence, but you are adaptable and engaging and new every morning. So how should we respond to the COVID crisis? Well, these are the 5 things that I tell all of my clients to work with, and I hope I've shown you that they do apply to us in ministry, to us in the church. But on Wednesday, we're going to go into a little bit more detail, and I'm going to give you some specific suggestions as to what I think church should be thinking about as we think about our community and how our society is changing, as we think about how the practice of church has to change, our orthopraxy, and then also our theology as well. I don't think that this is just a shift in the habits of the church and the practices of the church. I think COVID is one of those once in a generation, once in a lifetime moments when we actually, and society is questioning its faith, is asking where is God, and our theology is either going to adapt and adjust and respond and give a good answer, or it's going to prove itself worthless. So there's some deep stuff for us to be thinking about on Wednesday. But for now, if you would like to already send me some questions. So on Friday, we are going to be live and in person. We're going to be able to chat, and I'm going to be able to answer some of your questions. You can keep them for Friday if you want to, but if you would prefer to send me those questions now and give me a little bit of feedback as to your thinking and where you would like me to focus my attention on Friday. And even, by the way, I can change some of what I'm going to do on Wednesday in response to your engagement. Please go here. You'll see AHA Slides. Is a website, just with the slash, you can see there, or just take a photograph of this QR code now on your phone. You can just do this on your phone or any browser, and you'll just see the question. And the question is, what questions do you have for Graeme at the Excelsus conference? And you can just type your question in there, very briefly type your question. You might want to just put your name with the question as well, and then I can reference you as well. And this is a way for you to give questions to me that will engage. Otherwise, we will have an opportunity on Friday to engage with that. Otherwise, here are my contact details, and you can connect with me at any time that you like. Maybe especially have a look at my YouTube channel, where there are a lot of video resources that I hope will be useful for you. Thank you for taking the time to come along to this opening session at the conference, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.